Hello and welcome back to Cornell Cooperative Extension Sullivan County 4-H Learn by Doing Houseplant Edition series. It's Caitlin, and today we're going to cover one of the plants that's you can display the most uniquely, and that is air plants. And air plants come in hundreds of different varieties with lots of different colors and shapes and textures to them, so they can be a really fun addition to your houseplant collection, and they're pretty easy to take care of. Some of the biggest pitfalls is when to water and how often to water with these, which we'll definitely cover during this session. But something that I wanted to point out to you is, even though there are hundreds of different varieties of air plants out there, there are two basic breakdowns of air plants, and this will help you know how to care for them when you're selecting air plants. So the breakdown is mesic versus xeric, and all those words mean is that a mesic air plant likes to have a little bit more water. They usually are from an area like a rainforest, and they look a little different than a xeric plant, which usually hails from the desert areas, is more of a rock dweller, and requires a little less watering and a little bit more light to be happy. So the biggest difference between a mesic and a xeric air plant is usually the color of the leaves, and also they differ a little bit in what's called their trichomes. And a trichome is what the air plant uses to actually absorb water from the environment. So air plants, while they do have roots, like this one here, they do not need to be planted in soil. They usually just rest on either a tree or a rock, and they're non-parasitic, so they don't use their roots to take nutrients from another plant. They just use it as an anchor. So even if your air plant comes with roots, that's optional, but if it comes with roots, you don't plant an air plant. So they don't absorb any of the water through their roots. They absorb them through these trichomes. Now, a mesic plant will be usually a brighter green color or a very vibrant pink or red color, but they'll appear to be more waxy, a little bit more shiny than the xeric air plants will be. And they also sometimes are a little more grass-like in their leaves. And the reason why is because they usually take in a little bit more water, so they don't have as thick leaves. They don't store as much water within their leaves as some of the other xeric air plants do, which are used to going through a longer period with less water. And the xeric air plants are usually more of this gray color because their trichomes are larger. So it's typically the trichomes that are giving them this color, and that's why when you get them wet, they lose that gray appearance and they look just green or pink if they're blushing. So this is what the trichomes typically look like on a xeric plant, where it just kind of makes the whole plant look gray. But you can have the extremes, like this one here, where you can actually see the trichomes that they almost look like scales on this one. And even more so, this one here, the trichomes make it look fuzzy. It's more of a stiff kind of texture than soft. And I'll give you a closer look up on these guys. So a little closer look at mesic versus xeric. This air plant here is considered a mesic air plant, and you can see it's a little bit more shiny in its leaves. They're more vibrant green than some of the other examples I have here, and they tend to look just a little bit more grass-like. This one is very grass-like and very bright green, but right in the center you can see the start of the trichomes. So this one is still considered a mesic air plant, but it does have more apparent trichomes. So not all mesics are going to be super shiny and waxy. Now this one here is the start of our trichomes. You can see that it's much more gray in color, and it has a lot broader leaves, which is also an indicant that it is a xeric. This is another example of the trichomes. You can see on this one here that it almost looks like scales. And then finally, this one, the trichomes are so apparent that it looks fuzzy. Again, it is a little bit more stiff in texture, but its trichomes are super apparent, and those are what makes it look so fuzzy. When you get this one wet, it does actually look green like the rest of them, but the trichomes still stay pretty stiff. So this one just needs a little less water than some of the other ones that we have seen. As far as fertilizers go for these guys, that's really not necessary unless you're trying to force them to bloom. And air plants do bloom, but they only bloom once in their life. And then after that, all of their energy goes into making pups, which they usually put at the base of the air plant or at the sections where the leaves connect to the air plant. And once the baby reaches about a third of the size of the mother plant, you can safely remove that little baby air plant, and it can be a second plant, or you can leave them clumped together and they'll be perfectly happy that way as well. Now eventually the mother plant will die because they're monocarpic, so after they bloom, the rest of their energy stops going into growing and maintaining themselves, but grows into pupping. It does take a long time, usually, for the mother air plant to die, so you're not going to lose your plant right away, so just give it some time and let it ride and produce its pups for you. Speaking about babies, on this one you can see this really tiny little pup is starting right here. Now this one doesn't look like it's bloomed yet. Sometimes they'll start to cluster without blooming, but we'll see if this one blooms here shortly. But that is an example of where they grow. You can see right at the base of this leaf that baby came out, right at the base of the air plant. And this air plant here is starting to bloom. You can see the bloom coming right from the center, and you also notice that there's a slight color difference in the very center leaves. They almost have this little pink hue to them, and that's called blushing. And a lot of air plants will blush right before they bloom. So that can be an indication to you that your air plant is about to bloom. Okay, so now let's talk about water. Now there's 3 different methods that you can use to water your air plants. And the method that you use kind of depends on what kind of air plant you have, if it's xeric or mesic. So the 3 different methods include misting with a mister, and a method called soaking, and a method called dunking. So I have a bowl of water here and I have my little mister, and the plants that like a good deep soak for a long time are the mesic type plants. The ones that kind of just like a quick dunk are the xeric plants. Anything that has a really large leaf like this one is going to prefer more of a dunk than a soak. And anything also, whether it's xeric or mesic, that has a very bulbous bottom to it, like this one here, doesn't like to be soaked for too long because the water can collect in the bulb part and that will create rot. Rot is one of the most common issues that people run into when trying to raise air plants. It'll start with some blackening at the base of the air plant, and then eventually it'll go up to the growing part of the crown and the whole thing will fall apart, and unfortunately it'll die. So we want to be very careful with how we water these, and part of how to prevent rot is to make sure that you take care of them the proper way after they're watered. So in general, the mesic plants like a good soaking, and then they like a little bit of misting in between soaking. So if you soak them for about 20 to 30 minutes once a week, if you have a really hot, dry week, or if you have a lot of ventilation on them so they dry out really, really quickly, you might need to spritz them with a little bit of water in between your next weekly watering. But misting alone is not really enough to give the air plants what they need to survive. So I'm going to show you the different methods and how to properly dry them out after you water them, which really helps prevent rot. So this one is a very apparent mesic plant, it would like to be soaked. So I'm just going to put it in here, and we don't have to, if you're really worried about crown rot, you can kind of rest the base of the air plant up like this, and as long as most of the leaves are soaking to be able to absorb the water, this will do just fine to water this air plant. And then before you take it out, you can kind of make sure the rest of it is also completely wet while still keeping this part dry, and that will help prevent crown rot. Same thing with this one. This one is gonna like just to be soaked. So this is the next interesting thing, is even though this is a mesic air plant, I'm not gonna soak this one like I normally would, even for this variety, because it's about to bloom. And if the bloom stays wet too long, it will actually cause the bloom to rot, which if our air plant is gonna bloom, we wanna enjoy it. And some air plants' blooms can last for months. So we wanna try to encourage this bloom to stay. So as opposed to these guys that I'm just kind of letting sit in water, I'm actually going to just kind of roll this one in the water, and I'm going to try very carefully not to get that bloom stalk wet down in the center of it. So I'm just going to roll this guy, and I'm going to leave it on the side that the bloom isn't under the water for. So normally I would leave these guys in here for about 20 minutes. But the important part to note that we're going to do now is how to take them out of the water. Now you're going to need a towel for this. And when you take them out of the water, what you want to do is take the plant out, and you see how it's dripping right now. You want to really give it a good shake. So you want to do this somewhere where it's okay if stuff gets wet, like in your bathroom, and you give it a really good shake until you can't get any more water off of it. And then this one is a little tricky. I usually have a bowl to prop it up with, but just like how it was in the bowl of water, we're going to prop it up like this, upside down, until it is completely dry. The reason why we want to try to dry it upside down is because if we were to dry it right side up like this, any excess water that we did not end up getting off from shaking it out is going to go right down into the base of the air plant where the crown is, and it's going to sit there, and that is what usually causes rot to happen. That is why when we dry it upside down, even if we didn't get every single last drip of water shook out of these plants, gravity will take it out and away from the crown of the plant, which is what we want it to do. So very important to shake them well, shake all the excess water off, and dry them upside down. If your air plant is still wet after 6 hours of drying, you should introduce a fan at that point. And then at that point in time, you can put them back in their display. But definitely be patient and let them dry in between waterings so that you don't end up with crown rot. Now, for the plants that don't like to be soaked, what I do to dunk them is, I'm going to take this big one here, is I just put them in the water and I kind of roll them around. I make sure that I get all of the leaf completely wet, like that. And I'll do it a couple of different times. And then again, shake really good and set aside on our towel upside down. Now for this one, this bulbous one, I told you it doesn't like to get its bulb wet because it's so tight in there. It's really hard for that water to get out. So I tend to water this air plant with about this much sticking out of the water, just to make sure that I don't accidentally get water really deep into that bulb. Again, this one is a dunk instead of a soak, so then we're going to shake it off and put it off to the side. Now, if I had soaked this plant and then a couple of days go by and I notice that it's looking pretty thirsty, its leaves are kind of closing in on itself, and it's just really dry, that is when I would mist the plant. And how I do that is you hold the plant upside down and you really make sure that you mist heavily the entire plant. So it should be dripping wet while you're misting it. And then just like before, when we soak it, we give it a really good shake to get the excess water so it doesn't roll into the crown, off, and then put it upside down to dry. Air plants, because they don't need to be put in soil, can be displayed in really fun and interesting ways. They can be hung up, they can be attached to wood, they can just sit on your dining table with nothing else around them and just be kind of a statement piece just sitting in the table. When you're choosing a container for your, if you do want to display it in something for your air plant, you do want to stay away from terrariums or anything that's going to impede the airflow to the plant. And this part is really important, again, to help prevent rot. And the other thing you're going to want to avoid is any kind of display that has copper on it. Copper is actually toxic to air plants. The last thing that you can do is if you wanted to permanently mount your air plant to its display, I've seen them on geodes, I've seen them on rocks, you can use E600 glue, which is technically safe for the air plant. Again, roots are optional for these guys, so you can put a little bit of glue right here on the base of the air plant and mount it, permanently mount it onto your display. But the problem with that is then it's really hard to water it. You pretty much have to mist it at that point, and you'll need to mist it several times a day since you can't really soak it, but you can't get it super wet with misting because you can't turn it upside down most likely to let it dry. But really, you're going to want to stay away from anything that limits the air circulation, anything with copper, and if you want an easier time watering it, anything that's a permanent mount. Again, these guys like indirect bright sun. If they get too much direct afternoon sun, they do start to sunburn, but your xeric air plants can deal with a little bit more light exposure than your mesic. I hope that this video has been helpful to you and has inspired you to go and give air plants a try. They're very versatile little plants and they're super tough. For more videos about houseplants, please check out Cornell Cooperative Extension Sullivan County YouTube, Facebook page, and Instagram. You can also check out the link below for Sullivan County 4-H information and more project ideas. And happy growing. We'll see you next time.